It's called like Step into the Circles, and that reminded me of our circles, our CoSA circles and everything like this. How should that affect our treatment or our outlook on the core members? Can I have some comments? Yes, Chris?
As much victims as victimizers.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
Well, see, there for what the grace of God go lie. All of us have had some kind of, that woman's talking about the things she got away with because of who she was in society. That goes for a lot of what happens with offenders. There's 10 times the amount of people out there committing offenses as the ones that got convicted are in the primary and inward circle.
That's true. Any other comments? It's like when we think of if we had our core members into like a violence against women or violence against men still too in that sense, we would see them and treat them very differently still too as opposed to just offenders. So it's a matter of having that healthy blend of the two. They are offenders, they've offended sexually, but we do always have to keep in mind that they themselves, and I don't think I've ever had a circle that the core member was not abused themselves. So, I mean, that's something to always keep in mind. Connor, can you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, so my thought on that was like, it's a good thing for us to know as volunteers, because sometimes, you know, the crimes are the thing we focus on, but really it's their history of how they got to that point. And sometimes, so I think we've probably all been in circles sometimes where that is the comment from the core member of, well, I was abused and that was very difficult for me, which is an important thing to understand. But the challenge is to make sure that we find a way to break that cycle of abuse as well. So it's not an excuse and therefore justifies the behavior. It's context for us as volunteers to be aware of. But the challenge continues, which is to find out how do we help you break that cycle so that you were abused and now you've abused somebody. How can we move forward so you don't abuse again?
We have to be careful of them using that as an excuse, understanding it, but not using it as an excuse, because when you look at the number of men and women who were abused and didn't go on to be abusers, you know, that's important. So in CoSA, if they focus too much, or we need to understand that if they focus too much, then there are what happened to them, whereas the focus in CoSA is their abuse of others, right? And there are male survivors of sexual abuse, which many of our fellows are part of. So there are other programs to support. There's no one who wants to work with sexual offenders, and so far as their victimization of others, there are many groups who will work with them on their own victimization.
Yeah, I knew Marina was going to say that, so I was going to say something related to that. Is another way that we can kind of touch on the accountability side is psychologically, a lot of times it's hard for a human to understand the impact that they have on another person or appreciate the impact they have. And I think one way for us to kind of emphasize and help offenders realize the effects they had on their victim is to look back and reflect on how they felt as victims, and then try to help them realize that they are now causing that other person to feel that way. So I think that's another way we can use that victim history to kind of make them more accountable for their actions and understand the impact of what they've done.
That's a very good point. Anybody else have any other comments? It's always good to reinforce that and to refer back. I know we had one circle that the individual was abused a lot, and I honestly believe after a year and a half that he didn't realize the harm he was doing to the young children. It was so normalized for him. It was what he grew up with. It's what he knew. It's what his friends did. It's what his parents did. It's what his parents' friends did, and it was totally normalized. So that's always just something, and then he's embraced. He's totally embraced, recognizing over the year and a half that we've had him, he's recognized the harm he's done and that he's the adult, and those are not acceptable things to do. So there is, in that sense, we've got to just pull from their experience use that to get them to have some insight into them. And that goes to the restorative justice aspect and everything like that. Connor, anything more to add to it? Anyways, just wanted to show to you, just to get you to think about that, and not always just think about, to put it into context and have the right balance in our circles. That's the big thing. Okay? Good, thanks. Now, we are on to the next section, which is the video, the PowerPoint presentation. Yes, I'm gonna, Connor's gonna pass out, just take one little bundle. Everybody take a bundle of 3. You can take the elastic band off of it. I'll explain what we're gonna do with this. And what we're going to do, we're going to identify, is it a green light, which means that's okay to do in groups, whether by volunteer or core member. Yellow is like, uh-oh, there's a little caution here, we should find out a little bit more and look into it. And then the red one is that's basically a no-no, and that's something that we have to be careful of. Crossing boundaries, and this is both, we're dealing with boundaries for the volunteers and boundaries for the core members. Can have a neutral, a beneficial, or fruitful and harmful effect if you cross the boundaries. When you're deciding whether it's an issue or not for your core member, always consider the following: the impact it has on his life, his or her life. The risks incurred or consequences in both the short and the longer term. Is this like, oh, it has consequence, but it's insignificant and it won't be that long, so there's no big problem with it. It's not too much. Was it done openly or in secret? And that makes a big difference. Why is that important to know whether it's done in open or in secret? Can somebody answer? I want an interaction today. Input, okay? What do you think? Why is secret versus open an issue? You're all core members, you all know these answers. Okay, so can I have someone speak up?
The circle should act as one. So
Yes.
everybody should be on the same page.
Yeah. And what's the difference between if a core member does something openly or does it in secret? What's the impact?
Once you do something in secret and get away with it, you tend to continue until it gets out of hand. So it's always good to do things in the open. So that
And if he or she is opening that and just being open about it and tells you about it, you'd say, one, maybe he doesn't realize the impact of it. Maybe he doesn't know that this is a no-no. Maybe he's got to learn a bit more about it. And so that's what you have to say. If it's done in secret, it's something they know they shouldn't have done, right? And that's a no-no. That's basically, you want them to be open. And again, like in the material we just went through, there should be no secrets in the group, should be wide open. So that's always considerations when you're trying to assess the risk to your core member or to your own risk as a volunteer, okay? People differ in their ability to see what something they are doing will or might directly or indirectly affect the welfare of others. So that again is basically saying, if it's been normalized for you and it's not a big issue, then it won't matter to you. But we're there to share our experiences and our knowledge with the others with it. We are all fallible and may decide to do things without due consideration or reflection. Sometimes we just don't think of the consequences. And that's what happens with a lot of guys when they breach or they do otherwise. They're not thinking through the end. So if we can be there to talk about the situations, that's the best. Okay, now I want participation, for sure. Okay, volunteers must be aware of various types of risks. How to spot risks, how can we minimize the risk to ourselves and to the core members? How to identify what core member behaviors, actions might indicate changes in risk status. That wasn't an issue, but all of a sudden by him doing that, now he's at risk to reoffend or whatever, so we have to identify that. How volunteers' disclosures, actions can jeopardize appropriate boundaries within the circle. We sometimes don't always do exactly what we should in a sense, or we just bend the rules a little bit and we go on, and some of them have consequences and some of them don't. So that's something we should be always aware of, maintaining the privacy aspect. We don't disclose too much about ourselves. We have to be very careful in that sense. And as the circle wears on, as it goes on, as it gets older, you're more comfortable and you relax a lot. So you've always got to be aware that where you wouldn't have said that a year ago, when you first started the circle, all of a sudden you're opening up about all this stuff. So always be aware of this. And I think it's just to kind of show that it's always evolving. The circle's always evolving. We're evolving, they're evolving, and we've got to assess them differently all the time. How volunteers can manage risks. When you just, that's basically what you said before. Okay. So, what do you think? And this is where, if you think it's okay to do, put up the green sticker. If you think, I'm not sure about that, put up the yellow sticker, the yellow popsicle sticker. If you think that's a no-no, put up the red. We'll discuss it. That's a word, discuss. We'll discuss it to figure out, because not everything is just red, yellow, or green. We know that. We've got those gray areas and we've got those discussions, and things change. So we just want to see it and see if it changes maybe the way you've seen the scenario. Okay? Red is stop, yellow is caution, green is go. Okay. First example, the core member talks about his difficulties with his landlord. Lydia, the volunteer, tells him about how she resolved the conflict she had with her landlord. What is that? Red, yellow, or green? Everybody's got to pick up their sticks. You can't just sit there. Good shot. Yeah, that's true. That's an appropriate share. You're doing it, you're saying, that's what we're there for. We're there as volunteers to come up and say, this is how we manage difficult times. Share it, give them the examples of it. Good.
Providing if she doesn't share where she lives or any other details. And does she want him to know she's a renter or what? Yeah. There could be some
Play it in there. Yeah. The core member tells the circle that he did not call when he was feeling low during the weekend because he had run out of money and couldn't afford groceries. Sarah, the volunteer, agrees to buy him food. Okay. Good. Okay, so can you justify, can somebody give me the reason for why they're saying red?
Because it goes in the same category as giving them money. You don't give them the handout. But you have to give them a plan to control their spending or whatever it takes so they can take care of themselves.
They got to manage financially. Same thing? Good. Anybody else think differently than that? Or going to bring up another response? Okay, what's that, Chris?
I think maybe if you discuss it with the other members of the circle, and you agree that you're not just doing this as an independent actor, then there could be some appropriateness to this situation.
Okay.
but only if the circle talks to him about finances, he agrees to do a budget, that this doesn't happen again. So it can't be a one-time circle deciding what led to this and what are you going to do to rectify it. So it's basically.
Okay, yes, Bill?
Okay, I think you have to differentiate when you're thinking about these things. You have to think about the straight up answer. Like it's either right or it's wrong, basically. You have to look from that point of view. There are gray areas, I agree. But you have to, they all have a caveat that goes with it. But if you're discussing the caveat in the question there, then it has to get the red. It can migrate from there down to this, only if the group takes the appropriate action, because that's our responsibility side of it.
And again, it brings up the point that Sarah alone should not be doing this. It's got to be a group decision. Always a group decision.
And not when the core member's present and Sarah suggests it. She's still the one who looks like, hey, to the core member, it's my generosity that's talking. So that would need to be after the circle meeting.
So, I can't remember what I was going to say, Cameron. Connor, do you have something?
No, that was perfect, that was it.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. Again, what can that lead to if you let Sarah make the suggestions all the time? Dependence, yeah. Triangulation is all, oh, I've got somebody here that will do everything for me, not the group. Again, it's not the individual doing it, it's the group doing it. Yes, Phil?
And it takes away the accountability factor, not making the core member responsible anymore in any way.
That's good, that's good. This is what this presentation is that we're trying to get across. Not everything is black and white, and there's different considerations for different scenarios. So one answer doesn't necessarily fit all. So, and you have to make those assessments. As volunteers, every time he utters something, he or she utters something, every time there's an action, you should have to reassess and take a look at how that affects or has that changed the risk management of that core member. Any other comments before we move on? No? The core member attends all meetings. He maintains phone contact with only Susan during the week between circle meetings. What color stick is that one? Okay, good. Okay, can somebody that has a red stick justify the answer? What's the rationale? Okay,
The
go.
key thing that's left out there that the circle doesn't notice.
That's right, that's good. Anyone who's got a yellow stick, what do you say?
I would say that if the circle, the rest of the volunteers know, and they keep telling him that he has to contact all that are members of the circle, and he starts, then it's a yellow, but if he continues with just Susan, then it goes to red.
Yeah.
So like, that wasn't enough for me. Based on that, he just,
That's great,
they say it's a yellow.
good.
He has to be warned.
Any other comments?
I had a yellow stick, and I thought maybe, you know, the other volunteers are all working and they're busy during the day, but Susan's retired, she's available at home.
Yeah.
And so, you know, maybe during the evening he can call other people, but during the daytime, yeah.
That's a valid point, yes?
When the core member cannot have a group chat, like a WhatsApp group chat, right, so it might not be easier to tell each person the same thing, so as long as Susan shares it with the rest of the team,
Right.
and the core member knows that Susan is doing it,
Yeah.
I think it's okay.
Yeah, and I think if something's agreed upon, it's a good thing. If you find that, yeah, two others are working and they're not available, or someone else, I mean, that's a reasonable aspect. But you've got to always be remembering about the triangulation again. Again, you're just dealing, because maybe Susan's a bit more understanding about things and let things slide, or whatever else, so that you'd say, no, you can't just, it's not a one-on-one with the core member. It's not you and the core member. It's the core member and the circle. And again, if you just do that alone, that's not a good thing. You've got to stop that. That's triangulation again, and you don't want that. So that's the type of, if it happens that you call, always at the beginning of the next meeting, you always say, Susan, come up and say, Joe contacted me, everything else like this, and Joe, can you tell the group what you told me this week on the phone? So make sure that all that information is shared, but always, that's a bit of a burden always on Susan to always doing that. You know, sometimes you've got to be careful. It should be shared amongst everybody if you can. Maureen, comments?
If the other volunteers are available, and it's probably how it's written, then I would say it's definitely Susan's responsibility the very next time he calls to say, have you called the other volunteers and bring them up in the meeting? When one of the core members phones me now, and sometimes I'll have a meeting or they're just in crisis or something, and the first thing I say is, have you called your other volunteers? I don't care if it's a crisis or not, right? If they haven't tried to call them, I say, hang up and call them. Only call me if you can't get one of them. The relationship's with them, right? And it's got to be the same idea in the circle, right? So,
Yeah. Yes?
I have a scenario if other core members don't agree to give the phone numbers, and only Susan does.
Other core members don't have a phone, haven't given the phone number to the core member. If the other volunteers haven't given their phone number to the core member. That's a problem, and that's why it's always important to try to share it equally amongst all of you, and that's why we do say if you can have a mobile phone so that somebody can call and it's shared equally amongst all of you, and that's the best thing. Yes?
Could that be the case that the core member is female and Susan, of course, female, but the rest of the volunteers are male? Could core member be honest and say she's not comfortable calling other male volunteers?
That's a very valid point, and I'll be comment about that after too, but you know what it is that why we have circles and why Maureen always tries 2 men, 2 women. They have to be able to be comfortable and they have to see the benefits of relating. So we have to maybe slowly get them into it. It's like, I remember you were saying with the women's prison, they wanted to only give, they wanted to do CoSA circles for the women, but they only wanted women volunteers with them. But that's not the objective of CoSA. We're trying to say, we've got to get you integrated into the community. It's not all men and it's not all women. Some men can't relate to the women, and you'd say, you're going to have to deal with us, you know? This is the way we are. Connor, can you add anything?
Yeah, no, I would just say that, so that speaks to the intent of challenging the core member as part of CoSA is just to make sure that they are interacting with both sexes equally, and that we as volunteers also support each other to make sure that if you're noticing a core member's predisposition towards a certain, like a sex of volunteer, that we are challenging them on that as well and making sure that they're going. But it's a process, right? I mean, you can't just on day one say you are going to call everybody exactly the same way and you need to expect to have that happen. You need to sort of work them into that as well. So it's a really good point.
Maureen? It's not uncommon when a core member is being interviewed and they say to me, you know what, I relate better to women, or I relate better to men. They say I relate better to women. Normally now we're having 3 is all we can do in a circle. They say they relate better to women. I tell them I'm going to do my best to put 2 men and 1 woman on your circle, because obviously you need to learn to work with whoever you're having issues. But they say the opposite, I prefer working with women. I say, well then you're going to have 2 men and 1 woman. And immediately they get the idea, look, I need to work on my feelings towards whatever the sex is. It's really important. I mean, most of us are able to deal with both sexes if we're going to survive well out there.
Good. Any other comments? Anybody else have anything? I think this is really good because we're talking about all these different little cases and all the scenarios that we encounter all the time. And sometimes you don't have, you know, someone there, you don't want to keep on calling everybody, but so that you can kind of discuss the rationale behind things. Because there's sometimes very good rationale for why you're choosing to do the things you are. Next. Anson has shared with his circle that his relationship with his partner has broken down and they are going through a difficult separation. Anson is a volunteer again. It's always the names of the volunteers. Okay, what color stick?
Or remember, are you saying this is a volunteer?
Volunteer. Always when it's a name, it's a volunteer. The core member is always listed as a volunteer without a name. So Anson has shared. Okay, good. Okay, can somebody red justify it and somebody yellow justify it, please? Can I hear some feedback from red?
You're not supposed to share deeply personal information in a circle if you're a volunteer.
So that's absolutely true, Lynn. It's like now the circle becomes, the discussion is about you, not the core member. It's about your difficulties, your relationships. That's not it. It's not in general terms. It's going through all this. That's a good consideration. Someone else with a yellow sticker, the yellow thing. Yes, Chris? Oh, sorry.
I totally agree with that. However, relationship is a part of being out there for the core member to develop. So I think within, not giving too much detail, I think that could also help strengthen the core member's perspective and understanding of relationship.
Chris, what do you have to say?
Yeah, we always have our checklists, and we're talking about things that are challenges in our own lives. And I get it that, there's too much information in some cases, but, we're all going through our own, and sometimes putting those things on sort of humanizes us as volunteers.
I think it's a matter of, just a minute, Phil, I think it's a matter of degrees again,
Yeah.
right? How much you share?
Yeah.
Like this is like, okay, they're crying or tearing up at this time and they're not coping with it very well, now it becomes more about them. But the point is it's sharing, but it can be more in a general tone, and like Maureen often says, you say a friend of mine was going through a difficult time or whatever else, or haven't been paying as much attention. I apologize because I'm having some difficulties at home or whatever else, but broad, non-specific information. This is a lot of specific information a bit in here, I think. Phil, what were you going to
It
say?
all depends on the connotation of how it's delivered, the
Yeah.
length of time the circle's been together,
Yeah.
it actually depends a lot whether it's a man to a man or a woman to a man. All these things that can take into consideration.
Good.
The key to it is how much time you spend on it. If it's done as a passing, things aren't going too well for me, and you wonder why, whether it is, and you go on, that's one thing. But to make it now, to turn it around and make it the focal point of the circle, no, that's right.
Fine, anything to add to that?
Well, I think, so just to highlight something you said really quickly was, so the idea of saying that it happened to a friend of mine is a really great way for us to do everything we just talked about, which is to still relate. If it's a focal point, like the core member where they struggle with relationships and therefore you want your check-in to focus on that. The important part is just to keep you out of it, right? You're a volunteer as part of a circle. So I think that actually for me was one of the most important parts. Lots of circumstances, which I'm glad we all discussed here, but just keep in mind too that if it's personal to you, it is just as effective to say it was a friend of yours and then to talk through it, and it still serves the purpose of helping the core member.
Maureen?
I would say personally, 90% of the time, that should be a no-no. If I'm sitting in a group where someone is teary and says that, my focus is going to be what are they going through now and what they're going through and how they're feeling. If I were to go to a meeting and it happened once, and it's something I did not want to share, and I did say it was a friend and I was upset about the friend, it was myself. But other than that, just to say, hey, I'm going through a really bad time with a relationship. I'm sorry if I don't see myself tonight, I'll do my best. But that's all. The question is, are you sharing something that is going to help them? Maybe if you've been through the separation 3 years ago and your core member is going through a separation, just like we've had appropriate sharing by one volunteer after a few years who had been a victim herself of sexual abuse. And it was the perfect and the right timing and she did it well. But she'd been 3 years on that circle before she did. So the minute you share something like that, the focus is still on that volunteer who shared it. So if you can't go and handle it properly, I would suggest you miss that meeting, because then the focus is not on the core member. This is hard work we do. It's very hard work, right? And if you need support, talk to a couple of your volunteers after, if you want to do that. But not with the core member. Keep it on him, unless what you're sharing is going to help him or her.
I know that, and I have to confess to something myself. I remember when my husband had been diagnosed as cancer, and I thought I was okay with it, but I could see I was distracted and stuff, and he was diagnosed with it, and I went, I thought, oh, I can say this, if I'm going to excuse myself for not being in contact this week or whatever else, and I do it. And then I broke down, I'm like, oh my gosh. I said, I'm really sorry. Like, those things can happen if you think, but it's not ideal. It's not the way it should be. You got to get a grip of it, because it's not there. It's not about you. You got to be very conscious. It's not about you. I wasn't trying to do it that way, but that was, I thought was better under control. But that's an example of what not to do. So just keep that in mind with it. But we're all human, and the longer you're in a relationship, the more open you are with your core member. If you've been with the same core member for 5, 6 years, it's very different discussions and very different openness than it is your first week, and stuff. So you have to always keep that in mind, but always keep in mind the risk management and the guidelines and the rationale for why we do what we do in the circles. Any comments? Yes?
So can you, when you talk to somebody, a core member, can you think of a situation, it's not that serious, but can you ask them, explain it, not in detail, but just ask them, how would you deal with it? Because that's similar to something they're going through. And I think that will help them. Not to get in detail, but just saying, give them food for thought. That's the way I look at it. Sometimes I've done that, I know I have.
Maureen? Great. You in here? You just Do you want to just reiterate so Maureen hears that?
Okay. When you're in a circle, sometimes if you know somebody's going through a certain thing, and you know something similar, maybe to somebody else, or just a situation, and you ask them, you ask the car member, how would you deal with that? Ask their opinion. What advice would they give you to deal with that? See, I believe that sometimes that will help them
Yes.
focus. They'll work it through. I think it helps them work it through.
I think that's good. Then you use, which I use so often, I'm sure the volunteers are common. I have a friend, and you know what, they're going through this, and they're calling me, do you have any feedback that you think would be helpful for me to give them? Not saying it's about me, so it's not turning on me, it's giving that. But even that's got to be fairly minimal, because we are focusing on their situation. But there are times where you could say, like in the past, right? I know only once I shared personally one of the most tragic things in my life, because this person had struggled with a terrible loss of a child, and I've experienced that. And I've never done it before, but I felt this is the right time to say, you know, I didn't say much, but that I've experienced it, and how painful, how long it went on, and if they needed more support to call me. There is the odd time, but if I went into every meeting and talked, hey, you know what, I lost a child, right? That's about me, and it's turning around to me, but when the core member was faced with it. If that makes sense, Doug?
Yeah, I gotta work on that.
I think as volunteers, we constantly have to reassess it. Is this appropriate at this time and place? You know, some things you may not have ever shared with anybody, you do it that one time because he needs to hear this right now, or vice versa with it. You were going to say something?
Yeah. Can the relationship between the co-member and the volunteers change after the so-called period of sentencing? Like if the co-member is free to live on his own and independently, the relationship, can it be a little more, you know, like a friendship, or, you know, it's not really a friendship, but in terms of, you know, sharing information, would it?
Yeah, no, if the circle does not need that accountability and that focus on the core member, it's time to close it, it's time to move on. That there is a real balance between support and accountability, and so all of the factors are the same. I can't tell you how many core members we thought were doing well, and then out of the clear blue, something changes. We don't want to have shared anymore. It changes the whole balance in the circle. So no, just because they're finished their parole, if they still feel they need a circle, all of the conditions stay the same. And it's also to protect ourselves and our ability to be able to give 100% to that core member and not to be looking for anything in return. Because in return, as far as dealing with our own personal lives.
You know, the relationship that we have with our core members is different. It's still a relationship, but it's different, and we've got to remember that. We are simply a bridge until they can get readjusted and reintegrated. This is not a long-lasting thing. This is not the way the program is set up at this point. But the point is that we are simply a bridge. We have to show them how to develop friendships outside of the circle. How to, instead of depending on us 4 or 5 years down the road, we need to always keep in mind, we need to show them how to expand their circles. We are a bridge, simply, and when you think of it in that way, I think that's a good way. You'll notice that in the printouts that you guys were analyzing today, how we talk about learning how to develop outside support circles. That's our responsibility as a circle to help them say, you know, have you contacted this person, or you met this person there, or, you know, are you going to see them again, or whatever else. And I think it's important for them to do that, okay?
And just Bob, many of you know him, and he said it to the whole group at the talk he gave one time. I think it was support and development. And it was very interesting because he had a circle for 5 years. He was off his conditions. And then he reoffended. He went back to provincial for just less than 2 years. But he said to the volunteers, The relationship changed after 3 or 4 years. The volunteers shared a little more. This is going back quite a long ways. We were still learning in the process, right? But he said, partly because the volunteers were sharing more, they became more like friends. When I was struggling with child pornography, and I had this other relationship with the volunteers, you know how hard it was for me then to say, hey, you know what, I'm struggling. I had more of a friendship with them, right? And he said, the other thing he said, to learn by that, the other thing I advise you volunteers, never assume. Never assume we're doing all right. I was 5 years not doing all right, had this beautiful relationship that I didn't want to gum up. So there's so many years of experience in CoSA here, just in the Vancouver Fraser Valley, that you can see all of these, why the board has made the policies it's made. For good reason, experience.
Okay, no, that's okay. Just, do you guys find this kind of analyzing different case studies helpful? Scenarios, okay, well, we've got a few of them. I won't be able to show you all of them because I think we're running out of time, but
I'll be quiet.
no, we need this, we need you. A case study. The core member, Jackson, has 3 children. She struggles financially and with parenting skills. Jackie, one of her circle volunteers, drives Tamsin to the supermarket to help her with her weekly food shop. Tamsin says she finds this helpful. She feels less stressed dealing with her children when Jackie is with her and is learning to make healthier choices about the food she buys. Is this a red, yellow, or green light? Okay, good. Okay, oh, got all colors, that's great. That's I'm happy about that. Okay, someone who says green, can we start off with that? Can somebody give the choice why they said green?
I think it's okay that she drives her and helps to educate her about the food choices. It doesn't say that she's paying for it. So I think it's probably okay because she's just helping to drive her.
Good, okay. The yellow, can someone bring in the yellow? Chris?
Are the other volunteers aware?
Pardon?
Are the other volunteers aware?
That's a good point, yes. Is everybody agreeing that this is what she's going to do?
No group discussion.
Is there a group discussion? That's right. Were you?
Yeah, I was a yellow. I think it's a green thing. It's great when you're that supportive of a core member, and it's more just keep an eye on it to make sure that it doesn't lead to triangulation or that it's a secret within the group. I think that's all.
What about red? Anybody have a red that we can explain this? Like, every rationale is good. We just need to talk about this.
Yeah, I had read initially, but I think it's because there was no discussion, or is there a discussion?
I mean, the point is,
everybody has to know.
yeah, well, you're quick with this, but then it just shows us we have to ask more questions. We have to assess the whole thing as a whole instead of just saying, okay, that sounds okay. No, but is it this? Is it that? You know, is somebody else paying for the food? Is the group discussed? So that's what we have to go by. Okay. Next, Mo, one of the volunteers in that same group, emails you to say that Jackie has been paying for Tamsin shopping. So we see a lady that was coming up. Jackie is defensive and argumentative. She states that it is up to her to decide how to spend her money and she has a duty to ensure the children do not go without. Green, yellow, red. Everybody got the sticks up? Okay, anybody got green? Okay, somebody's got yellow. Can you give comments, please? Yellow comments? There's a lot of yellows up there. No comments?
I didn't see any
Reds? No yellows? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, maybe it's the light of this. Sorry. Okay, reds. Why? Can we have some people comment? Phil?
No team play here. This is strictly a personal decision she's got to post on the group, which is totally against what's going on.
Great. Somebody else?
I think she's enabling Tamsin to balance her financial again.
Yeah.
And it kind of plays where I think Jackie feels that the kids shouldn't go out, which is true, but if their mother was financially doing that, like we're enabling her to be self-sufficient.
Okay. And And if
Jackie
he-
can't be with her for the rest of her life.
No, that's right. And the point is that it doesn't sound like the rest of the group really knows that she's paying this. This has been an individual. It's like she's one-on-one with her as opposed to the core member and a circle. Always has to be involved in this. Argumentative, defensive, that's not good. You obviously seem to think you know there's a problem there right off the bat when you have to get that way. 6 months later, Mo says it's getting increasingly difficult to work with Jackie. She can be obnoxious and often dismisses the views of the other volunteers. He doesn't want to upset her, however, as he believes she means well. Mo inadvertently finds out that Jackie has paid for a weekend away for Tamsin and her children. When he questions her, she uses the same arguments as before. Let's see the sticks. Should we all see the same color? That's right. That's right. No question about that. Okay, what are you going to do about this though now? What are you going to do?
Time to talk to the administrator and get that circle reorganized.
That's right. That's right.
I have a question for the group actually. So let's go back to stage 2. How would you handle this as volunteers? So Mo sent an email. You received it, and then I guess it was raised with Jackie. So we've all probably, I have to believe at some point you've had an issue with volunteer, you've had a hard conversation with a volunteer. What's the best way to deal with conflicts with volunteers in CoSA? It's not the problem solver for everything. We've got a lot on our plate. How would you as a circle deal with it, I guess? This comes up. I think actually we spent a lot of time talking about how we deal with hard conversations with the core member, but hard conversations with volunteers are
I
tough.
think the volunteers have to meet together without the core member, preferably with somebody from the administration, and have all the things laid out on the table and get some proper direction. And if the people can't follow the direction, then probably the group, the circle, needs to be reorganized.
Walter?
Pull out the covenant and say what part of the covenant says that you're allowed to pay for her stuff.
What part of the what, sorry?
The covenant
Oh,
should
yeah.
cover it.
Yeah?
Because that's what everybody signed.
Yeah.
And what about the maps each week, where it says confrontation or disagreement, right? And when there's conflict among the volunteers, I often hear about it from one volunteer, and I say, did you bring it up in the circle? Well, no, I can't do that in front of the core member. And I say, don't think for 2 seconds the core member is not aware that there's some conflict among the volunteers. This is a time for the circle to show how to deal with conflict, for the volunteers to show their conflict, how to deal with it to the core member. It's very important. And when the volunteer is often said, even by some really good volunteers who are here, who say, I can't do that. And I say, well, come to the next meeting, but you have to bring it up, and I'll help you work through it. But the core member needs to see, they're aware if there was disagreement in the meeting. So to pretend we, need to meet by ourselves, that's not being totally honest with the core member either. Most of them can figure out conflict.
Really great story. Kristen Bell and Dak Shepard, they talked about, they were there, I don't know if everyone's aware of who those people are, but anyway, and they mentioned that, so one thing they learned really early on is if they have a fight between the two of them and they resolve that fight behind closed doors, their kids don't learn anything. They see the fight, and they never know how it was resolved. It just disappears. And so their comment is that if they do have a disagreement, even if it is to the point that they have to resolve it on their own, they stage the discussion again with their kids present to make sure they hear sort of what the problem was and the way the solution came about. So I personally tend to agree more with Maureen that you could have this whole discussion in front of the core member. I don't think there's anything unhealthy necessarily. If it is a really serious issue among the volunteers and you think it needs to be discussed, so first as volunteers so you can have a constructive discussion, I'd still encourage you to resolve the issue with the core member present because it's such a wonderful learning opportunity for them to see how conflict can be resolved in a healthy way.
Well, in fact, if I can just take it one step further, I think that you have to have discussions about this before it gets to that stage with the core member and say why this is and why this isn't correct, and sort of show how you build consensus and how you constructively work through something. And so it should never actually progress beyond that particular meeting when you actually have the thing come up in the first place.
You've got a role model, what you want them to learn, what to do, and how to manage things like this. Because they're going to have those kind of conflicts and everything else. Let's take that opportunity to role model how it should be dealt with. Okay? We'll do a couple more. Oh no, I said that was done and over with. Where am I going? I'm going the wrong way. Okay,
Maybe
honestly,
just one more.
okay, so
I'm
maybe,
not sure if
let me,
they're using the whole two, I promise.
I'm just gonna use one here. I'm gonna find another one here. I'll just do this one and then we'll go. The core member has no longer any restrictions regarding alcohol, drugs, location, internet, etc. He shares with the circle that gamble at the casino and $100. Who thinks that's okay? We gotta find out more information, or no, that's a no-no. Can you see the colored sticks?
You're cheating.
Okay, good. Someone with yellow? What's actually, want someone with red? Can you bring up your comments?
I have read, and I think it's a dangerous path to go down because you can get addicted again, and just because you won, you're gonna lose just as much, if not more.
Okay. Any yellows or other reds? Yellows? Can we hear anything? Yes?
I think it's a cause for discussion with the pitfall of gambling. Gambling is a legal activity and he has no restriction. So in his life, and he can make that choice and he should be able to make that choice himself. But if he make that choice, we could talk about what the downside of gambling. So I think the discussion is one.
Lynn?
Yeah, pretty much agree with that.
Yeah. I think that's the big thing, is that one, is he running out of money by the end of the next paycheck and he's not being financially responsible, then that's not a very good thing. It's good. And sometimes some people with addictions, if they've got drug or alcohol or sex addictions, they replace it with another addiction. So you've always got to be, it's a real caution area. Yes, if he chooses, if he's got the money, the resources, he hasn't any limits, he can go spend $100. He doesn't tell you how much he loses though. He only tells you how much he won. But, so those are some of the things that you've got to keep in mind. So when something looks so straightforward, I guess in conclude, I'm going to just go forward. We're going to miss some of these other scenarios, but if you guys like it, we can always follow through on some more case studies another time. Again, remember, crossing boundaries, the impact, the risks incurred or consequences in both the short and longer term. Was it done openly or in secret? And everybody differs with it. So just keep it in mind that you've got to assess everything. You can't be complacent and just see what it looks like. You've got to investigate and find out. Do you want to add any comments, Connor?
You nailed it.
Maureen?
Great, I think it was a great exercise.
So some of those case studies, and then at least we get a feeling for what we have to think about when we do it. Any comments or questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much.